Carl, you happy?
Oh, I no. Uh,
Uh-uh.
did
Carl
anybody
is
know
such a Luddite on AI. This I love.
Skynet.
Skynet? Am I the only person who thought of Skynet while he was talking?
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Wednesday, January 22nd. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan, Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon, and RCP White House Correspondent Phil Wegmann. And Phil, let's start with you today. You had a piece on RCP about Secretary of State Marco Rubio and this cable he sent to U.S. embassies around the world, in which he says, and this is the quote, "Every dollar we spend, every program we fund, and every policy we pursue must be justified with the answer to three simple questions. Does the action make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous?" So what's the importance of this, and what does it tell us about how he will lead the Foreign Service in a different direction maybe than his predecessor, Antony Blinken?
It's an immediate answer to the question that I've been having for some time with now Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He is a MAGA convert, someone who did the homework after his failed 2016 presidential bid to try and understand the direction of the Republican Party. And he has sort of adopted a more hardline stance on a number of these different MAGA priorities, sort of backfilling the intellectual underpinnings for them. And yet at the same time, he's also beloved by a bipartisan majority in the Senate. He was confirmed 99-0. So my question was, are we going to have a softer, more diplomatic MAGA presence at the State Department, or is it going to be hard-edged? And the answer that cable that was leaked to us gave was that no, Rubio is going to continue with an America First foreign policy. Those three questions that he laid out in his committee hearing are the questions that he immediately sent through this ALDAC cable, which basically he was putting every single diplomatic and consular post in the State Department on blast. He sent that cable immediately as his first, action really at Foggy Bottom to answer that question, to tell the State Department that there's a new regime.
Carl, what'd you make of the cable, and in particular, he did hit again something we've talked about. He attacked the Global Engagement Center and talked about condemning censorship.
Well, that's right. But Rubio has been outspoken against censorship. And I guess I don't quite see the conversion quite the way Phil does. I think some of it's more style than substance. He's the son of immigrants who came from communist Cuba. He's been a staunch anti-communist the whole time he's been in public life. He was that way in Tallahassee. He's warned about China. He's been sort of, this pro-America thing, pro-nationalism, that's gotten a bad sort of rap in certain establishment circles, but that was the way through most of this country's history that our foreign policy was conducted unabashedly. Nobody made apologies for it. I think the idea, and this is not just in Trump world, although I'd be curious what George W. Bush thought of that cable, or even what his father would have thought. It didn't sound diplomatic, but what American would argue those aims? There's a thought in the Trump Republican Party, and not just the Trump Republican Party, earlier conservatives, that the State Department's gotten squishy, that it's pushed sort of, it hasn't been pro-Americans. It's pushed this kind of woke agenda that came from college, like kind of embarrassed to be Americans, and Christian refugees from China are given short shrift. And so I think this corrective strikes me as it's certainly going to be stark at the State Department. I think Rubio's on pretty safe ground. And as Phil mentioned, there's a popular guy, 99-0. You don't that tells you the Senate colleagues not only liked him but respected him.
Tom, what do you make of it?
Yeah, well, first, let me congratulate Phil on getting this exclusive. I mean, we had it first at RCP before anybody else, and it's a big story. I mean, it is this first communication from the new Secretary of State to every single post all around the world, basically sort of laying down the law of how they're going to proceed. It's an important message, and I think it's in my opinion, it's a kind of a break with the past. And we'll see how the State Department executes that moving forward as they deal with all of these multiple crises around the globe, and God knows what's going to pop up next. But look, Rubio's an accomplished guy. Everybody, not people, they like him, but he's also, I think he's effective. I mean, I think he has, he's risen up through the leadership ranks, and we had a piece by Margaret Carlson today. I mean, it turns out maybe failing in 2016 to Donald Trump actually, wasn't a bad thing for Rubio, in terms of, I mean, obviously he wanted to win the presidency, but if he wasn't able to do that, look, Secretary of State is a good fit for him, and we'll see how he leads that department. It's a very important job.
Andy, can I make one quick comment about what Tom said about 2016? Tom and I covered that campaign. I was with Rubio in Florida, where his campaign essentially ended for president. And he had announced that he wasn't running for the Senate, that he didn't want to be in the Senate. He was stepping down. And within, a 24-hour period, Trump wiped the floor with him in Florida. He was very popular there. And he saw what was going on in the Republican Party. And a couple months before in New Hampshire, it looked like Rubio was going to maybe get close to Trump, maybe even beat him. And he wasn't ready yet to be president. And I think that's, he seems to realize that and sense that, but I don't think he's given up on the idea of being president.
Right. Well, Phil, just back to this memo for a second. And, Carl, I hear what you're saying. You would think this was non-controversial, but if you follow the State Department at all lately, this is a bombshell in my view. And whether you believe it's corrective and needed, or whether you think it's too MAGA, I'll leave that to others. But Phil, I'm wondering if you've gotten any sense of what the reaction is inside Foggy Bottom.
You certainly have Rubio moving quickly to put in place personnel who are going to back up this vision. There was reporting previously that 20 diplomats, both career and political, who were brought in from President Biden's administration were told the Friday before Inauguration Day that their services would no longer be needed. But in terms of what this memo signals, in 2016, Rubio was perceived as much more neoconservative than he is today. He has changed, and we've profiled him twice at this point. He's changed his opinions on tariffs, on trade, on the global order overall. And what he has argued most recently in his last book was that the United States wasted a post-Cold War moment. He has sort of said, Francis Fukuyama is wrong. Democracy is not going to just naturally rise to the top. There are going to be all of these other threats. And so immediately in that memo, yes, there is the announcement that he's going to be putting the brakes on DEI initiatives, that meritocracy is going to be most important. He says that the censorship regime is going to end. But he also says something very interesting when he tells the State Department that for decades, they have put ideology over common sense, that they have misread the world. And so instead, what you have with Rubio moving in there is someone who's going to be much more realist. And he's not just trying to correct what he sees as the seeping in of politics under his predecessor, Antony Blinken. He's trying to undo a regime that in many ways he sees as starting, in George H.W. Bush, continued through, Clinton and Obama and now Biden. He's trying to, perhaps bring the United States back to, if not a 20th century foreign policy, maybe a 19th century one.
Yeah. Well, Tom, Elise Stefanik was on the Hill yesterday, on Monday, and she said that something interesting. She was talking to Chris Van Hollen, and she said that Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank. That raised some eyebrows. And I'm wondering, in the context of what Phil's been saying, what do you make of that? And what does this say about how we will approach the UN, and especially the UN issues revolving around Israel?
Well, I'm not going to touch that one, Andy. What are you trying to trap me into? Oh my God. Carl can have that one if he wants.
I got an idea. Well, Andy, what it made me wonder about, on his first day in office, Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord.
Right.
Nobody cares about that. Maybe they care in Paris. He also did the same thing with the World Health Organization. And there was an announcement that they're not going to fund this unit of the United Nations that it turns out half their people turn out to be in Hamas, or, I'm exaggerating. But my question is Donald Trump going to keep the United States in the United Nations? This desire, we used to talk about isolationists and internationalists. Now the term of art is globalists. Trump's obviously more of an isolationist, but it's more than that. He constantly complains that other countries are not paying their way, that these international groups are actually working against the United States of America. If you start thinking about that and you open up this in your mind, well, do we really need to be in the UN? Donald Trump's just the kind of guy who might say, well, why? And so,
yeah, well, I'll tell you exactly why we should stay in the UN.
You have to tell Trump, because I'm not advocating.
No,
go ahead.
You may not like this answer, Carl, but to me, and it's a question, whether Elise Stefanik can play this role. But if you remember, Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Jeane Kirkpatrick, who were two UN ambassadors who brilliant, whether you agree with them or not, everyone agrees they were two of the most important public intellectuals of the 20th century, both used it as a platform to make the case for America before the rest of the world. And I think it's worth it just to have, and if she can do it, it'd be great, just to have someone there, using that platform in that way. So Phil, we just got a minute or so left here, but any insight into any of these other national security folks who are up on the Hill now? Are they all going to make it, do you think, or what's going to happen?
There's still drama about Tulsi Gabbard and her paperwork. Democrats are really, driving their heels into the ground on this one. I think that they see her and RFK Jr. as the most vulnerable. But what we see from Stefanik and what we saw just the other day from Rubio is that there's a new consensus that Republicans who are on board in this administration are completely bought in on, the new president's foreign policy vision. And I don't think that we can take for granted some of these proclamations that he says, right? During Inauguration Day, his address, he immediately is talking about the Panama Canal. He's talking about Greenland. This is a president who I think has switched gears to focus on his legacy. Best way to do that is to expand the map in his mind. And I think foreign policy is going to be a new aspect of this administration that plays a much more central role than perhaps during his first term.
Yeah, well, we're going to keep an eye on it. And Phil, really appreciate your reporting on this. You can see Phil's reporting on RealClearPolitics.com. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom, Phil, and Carl. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Tom, on Tuesday, we had this White House press conference. Trump announced what's called Stargate. It's a new joint venture to build artificial intelligence in the United States. Its partners are OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank. The leaders of those companies were all there. So tell me, are you happy that this kind of investment is happening under Donald Trump?
I'm of two minds about this. I mean, I do think there's a lot of good that AI can do. I am worried that not enough sort of guardrails have been put down. There's not enough understanding of AI. And I don't trust Sam Altman to be the sort of arbiter telling me that, as he did last night, we ran the interview that Brett Baer did with those three. It was Sam Altman and Larry Ellison and the head of SoftBank, the Japanese, I forget his name at the moment.
Masayoshi
Son.
Son.
Yeah. But anyway, Sam Altman was like, oh, yeah, we got plenty of guardrails. Well, I don't know about that. So look, is the investment good? I think I would like to see the United States be a leader in the space of AI. We don't want to just cede the territory to the Chinese and anybody else. So we do need to be competitive. So I think in that sense, it's good. But I would like to have a little more reassurance that we're going to be doing this in a sort of that it's going to be done in a way that maximizes the good that AI can do while minimizing the potential bad and catastrophic because AI is a very powerful tool, whether you're for or against it. I mean, I think everybody agrees it is a powerful sort of game-changing application.
Carl, you happy?
Oh, no. Did anybody
Carl is such a Luddite on AI.
Skynet.
Skynet. Am I the only person who thought of Skynet while he was talking? Let me. Yeah, the good and the bad of AI. They say it can cure cancer. Well, it can't cure cancer. The idea is that it can maximize human intelligence and apply it to a lot of fields. Well, we should do that. We should do that ourselves without machines. And why do I say that? Look, I grew up in California. I covered the Silicon Valley, first came to Washington. I'm not a Luddite, but this is a different thing. This is a tool that every ethicist and science fiction writer who looked at it for 100 years came out the same place. I think I, Robot, that's Isaac Asimov. I think that book's 100 years old. And what happens is you create these machines, they're going to solve problems. They're going to, but okay, so they can't kill human beings. So the directive one, the prime directive, whatever science fiction book or movie you're talking about, they can't harm human beings. Well, how long does it take these machines, once they're sentient, to figure out, oh, what's the biggest threat to human beings? Human beings. So we're going to take them over and we're going to protect them. It's the end of the human race is what it is. I would like the $500 billion to be spent stamping out AI in every country that tries it.
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen, Carl, but
I'm not winning the argument, but in years from now, Skynet will destroy this tape. So nobody can hear that I warned, but that I was John Connor, but there you have it.
Okay, well, here's what I thought of it. It just reminded me that this is an infrastructure project, and it makes you think and remember that there is no such thing as the cloud. There's no such thing as cyberspace. That's all just made up. What it is, it's all wires, it's boxes, it's cables. It all exists in the physical world. Ultimately, it requires infrastructure and a ton of electricity to make it all work. And if we're going to be part of this going forward, we're going to need to build that infrastructure. And that's what they're promising to do. I'm actually for it. I think that it's a private investment, and it's going to create jobs.
I'm going to send you guys a copy of iRobot and the whole
the CDs. Andy sounds like he thinks we can just, if it goes bad, we can just, because it's all wires and boxes,
that's right.
Unplug it.
Unplug it all.
Pull the plug.
Yeah. That's right. Well, Carl, the other thing that happened at that press conference yesterday, and it is it's like drinking out of a fire hose with Donald Trump these days. But he talked about your state, California, and he can solve the water problem. So here's what he said. I just want to get your reaction.
They have a valve, and it turns like, think of a sink, but multiply it times many thousands of times the size of it. It's massive. And you turn it back toward Los Angeles. Why aren't they doing it? They either have a death wish, they're stupid, or there's something else going on that we don't understand.
Carl, did you know it was that simple?
The valve?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well, it isn't. This is a fixation with Trump's. He spoke in Orange County last year at the state Republican convention, the annual convention, and he was out there during the debate, which he didn't participate in, or he flew out maybe a day. Yeah, he was out there. And Ron DeSantis and all these people who thought they were running for president were at Simi Valley at Reagan's Ranch. But he went down and he talked about this. He did this whole riff about he'd be flooding the High Sierra with water. It made no sense. It's like pretends gravity doesn't exist. And he just this riff. And he talked about people in Beverly Hills, how they stink, even though they're rich, because they can't afford a shower, because Gavin Newsom won't let them take showers but twice a week. It was very
He's right
fun.
about that, Carl. Come on.
It was very funny, and the crowd was laughing. Everybody enjoyed it except the press row where I was. These people were frantically fact-checking. No, you can't take a shower more than once a week in Beverly Hills. They were the dour reporters. And I remember thinking we were missing the point. But now I think maybe I was missing the point. Because Trump has this very funny stuff. He could have been the best New York insult comic in history, but now he's like basing public policy on these fantastic rants, these things that he says that he just seems to pull them out of nowhere.
Is there any, Tom, factual basis in the idea that there is a valve? It's like a big sink, and I mean, it's such a great visual image. It's like a
Well, he's talking about the water from the delta and the viaducts that bring water down, and there is an environmental fight over this fish, the smelt. You know, there's something there, but it doesn't work that way. And most of Los Angeles water comes from the east. It comes from the viaduct from Imperial Valley, Colorado River, and other places. Most of it doesn't even come from Northern California. He doesn't know anything about water policy in California. I'm sorry, you asked Tom. I'll be quiet now.
Well, no, I mean, Carl, you know a lot more about it than I do. I mean, I'm not an expert on water policy in California. And as with most things Trump, I suspect, that there is some truth to this. And he's clearly, not just pulling it out of thin air. Someone told him this and it stuck with him. Someone briefed him on this and he got this in his head that it can be solved that easily. Now, obviously it's more complicated than that. Things always are more complicated. But I suspect if you dug into this and peeled back the layers, there is some truth there that these reservoirs have been mismanaged and they could have done a better job. They probably still could be doing a better job of getting more water into Los Angeles, but they're not. And I think, but again, I don't want to vouch for what Trump said. Maybe there is a valve. Who knows? We really don't know.
we need some good reporting on this, Carl.
There's no valve.
But well, Carl, just in terms of the last 48 hours, when you look at this, I mean, how is the press going to handle this? I mean, there's just this constant. I mean, maybe it'll slow down, but it just every day already there's just 50 things to report on. And I asked Phil earlier off camera about making time for the radio show, and he says, Andy, you got to understand, it's going to be it's more than a 24/7 job just keeping up with things in the White House now.
Well, I'm going to talk to Jack Hamilton about this later in the show, Andy. He wrote a piece for us. It's on our front page today. Basically said that when Trump says some of these fantastic things, that it hurts him, and that being this spread out and having this many priorities. I mean, I covered the White House for 15 years. It's hard to move the ship of state. A president who succeeds. This was one of the faults Jimmy Carter had as president. He was trying to do too many things. Ronald Reagan wanted to do a couple of big things, and he did them. It's very difficult, and I think I'm interested to see what Jack will talk about. But in his column, he suggests that when Trump makes these unfactual, rhetorical, this flights of fancy, and when he diffuses his policy, that he's actually, it's not good strategy. He's hurting his ability to really get things done of the things he cares about. And the issue he seems to care about the most is the border. And that's the issue that, Democrats probably lost this election on. So yeah. It seems to me that ought to be his main focus.
Tom, too much too soon?
We'll see. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he can do everything that I don't think we have enough evidence to say that he can't do, multiple things at once. Again, we talked yesterday about how it's a different environment than it was in 2016, 2017, right? There's less resistance in the media, among Democrats, among his own Republican Party. So maybe he can do a lot of this stuff. I mean, we'll have to wait and see on that. But look.
Well, Tom, the media thing is starting to shift already, though. So CNN covered the inauguration day pretty straight. But by Wednesday, Jim Acosta, they got some woman from Idaho who turned down the pardon, who said, "No, I'm guilty. This is all Trump's fault. He's a terrible liar." And Jim was milking this,
right. And the Heil Hitler salute, right. Hoax machine was in full force, and now we've got the Pete Hegseth, his sister-in-law, all these outlets ran with this story, even though his ex-wife denied that any of this stuff ever took place. So yeah, obviously the media is going to do its thing, but I do think there is. I remember in 2016 and 2017, that campaign was so frenzied right up until the end, and everybody, the way it had traditionally gone is that there was you got a break afterwards, and it was you were able to relax and sort of decompress before the pressure started building again and all these things. And it just never happened with Trump. I remember our staff, everybody in Washington seemed absolutely ragged and exhausted with 3 weeks into the administration. There's a similar feeling today. And I just wonder how long that's going to. Part of the reason that was is because everything Trump did was a 5-alarm fire. And we kind of get that same feeling going on right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. I'm Andrew Walworth. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I've got with me Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. And Carl, Ichiro Suzuki of the Seattle Mariners became the first Asian player elected to baseball's Hall of Fame. Carl, you said before the show we had to talk about this, so here we go. What are your thoughts?
Well, he won't be the last. Shohei Ohtani is going to be there. Ichiro came over here. He was 27. Tom will remember this because Tom was living in Seattle at the time, and he played for the Seattle Mariners. He was 27 people, and as soon as people started watching him play, he was a breathtaking player. He led off. The Mariners team, I think they won 116 games. That's the most ever. And he was a sublime talent from the beginning. He had a very unorthodox style. He'd a slap hitter. He'd sort of place hit the ball wherever he wanted. He was an amazing outfielder, won 10 consecutive Gold Gloves. Slight 5'11", 160 pounds, arm like a cannon. People wouldn't even run on him after a while. And he was a breathtaking player. I went and saw him in person several times and just couldn't take my eyes off the guy. And a couple years into his, his rookie of the year, MVP. A couple of years into it, people said, "Oh, if he'd come over here sooner, oh shoot, maybe we should count the stats from the Japanese league so he could be in the Hall of Fame." And guess what? They didn't even need to do it. He's in the Hall of Fame. He had 3,000 hits, which is the barometer. It's an automatic, ticket to Cooperstown. And he was also a great philosopher and the driest comedic wit I've ever seen. Too bad he couldn't be president, but he wasn't born here. Anyway, I'll give you 2 or 3 of my favorite Ichiro quotes. One of them said, how do you like Cleveland? He always spoke through an interpreter. He understood English and spoke it a little bit, but he wanted to be careful. And normally what do players say? Oh, Cleveland's great. Yeah. He said, "Oh, well, Cleveland, I guess we have to play here, because it's on the schedule. But if I told you that I liked playing in Cleveland, I would have to punch myself in the face because I would be lying." I don't think Cleveland Indians, they were called then, fans like that too much. One time his phone during batting practice, and I think this was him being funny, but somebody texted him and he goes, "I have this text from this number I don't know." And he says that A-Rod gave it to him. "Do you know this guy?" He showed his phone back a second. "That's Tom Brady." And he goes, "Who the F is Tom Brady?" with a straight face. Brady won 5 Super Bowls. And Brady wanted to talk about his stretching. And the thing is, so the game has changed. Baseball's changed, right? And now home runs are the whole thing. And he would get singles, stolen, and steal second. Stolen base, singles, no, very passe. But every once in a while, he would just, when the situation demanded, he'd go ahead and hit a home run. There's a YouTube video of him hitting a 426 home run in batting practice at age 50.
Wow. And
when you think of Ichiro, this is the quote. It's from Ichiro himself. Ichiro Suzuki is his full name, but Ichiro was on the back of his uniform, and it means in Japanese firstborn son. And he's the firstborn, Japanese son to make the Hall of Fame and be a star. And somebody in the 90s, people say, or early 2000s, phrase, "chicks dig dingers" was a phrase. And Ichiro's response to that was, "Chicks who dig home runs aren't the ones that appeal to me. I think there's sexiness in infield hits because they require technique. I'd rather impress the chicks with my technique than my brute strength." And then he paused and then he said, "Then every now and then, just to show that I can do that too, I might flirt a little by hitting one out."
Well, Tom, we've got about 30 seconds left. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, look, I did grow up in Seattle, although my Mariners were of a slightly older vintage. Ken Griffey Jr., Edgar Martinez, Jay Buhner.
Ken Griffey
those
Jr.
guys.
was Ichiro's hero.
Yeah. And so, but Ichiro was a fantastic player. He batted over 300 for 10 straight years. As Carl mentioned, he came into the league in 2001 and won everything. He won the MVP, won Rookie of the Year, Golden Glove, Silver Slugger. I mean, the guy was a phenomenal talent. And it was nice that he, was at the Mariners for as long as he was. I mean, he was the team. I mean, he's an icon. He's a hero globally, obviously back in Japan, but in Seattle as well.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to leave it right there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM, where we talk about things other than politics from time to time. I've been talking with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. Don't go away. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics, talking now with a dear friend, Jack Hamilton. If you read him on Real Clear Politics, it's Professor John Maxwell Hamilton to you. He's a professor at Louisiana State. You're down in Baton Rouge. I heard you had snow.
It's a freak of nature. We had a foot of snow, which never happens, and then it was 14 degrees this morning.
Wow! Yeah.
Like living in New York City, New York State.
Yeah, it's cold here too in Washington. All right, Jack. Donald Trump assumed office on Monday. I've been agitating for 4 years that Joe Biden should hold more press conferences. I'm beginning to rethink that. Donald Trump's held 2 already. The first 2 days, the first 24 hours or 30 hours. One of them was a rambling thing on Tuesday where he said that all Gavin Newsom has to do is switch a valve in Southern California of all the water it needs. And it was sort of downhill from there. But you wrote a column about the inaugural address and about you're a student of history. You write about the presidency, you write about the press. Just tell our viewers, if you're watching this on our YouTube station, if you're watching the podcast, or if you're listening on Sirius XM radio, Jack, tell our listeners about the column, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about it.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Carl. The speech has gotten a lot of praise. The Wall Street Journal gave it praise, which was surprising to me. Not the Wall Street Journal editorial page is conservative, but they're also quite rational and thoughtful. And I was really taken aback by how much they like Trump's speech. But the problem with the speech is when you really strip it all down, it just makes all kinds of bogus statements and vapid statements that are just meaningless. Or when it's meaningful, it's contradictory. And so the speech has a number of internal contradictions. And you have to wonder about that and what that really means for governing. Does that mean that you can't do all of these things? And if you really think you can, or you haven't thought it through that well, then what does that mean for what the next 4 years are going to be like? There are certainly things that need to be changed.
All right, but let's give 1 or 2 examples
of what needs to be changed.
No, from the speech, of things that just were unrealistic or don't really track.
Okay, you say you want to have you want a more efficient government, but in the speech you say you're going to create a brand new department that Elon Musk is going to head. So you create a department to create more efficiency, but I mean you actually just hire more bureaucrats. You say, on the same vein, you say you want to have a bureau for external revenue, that is to collect tariffs. Well, that's just a silly gimmick. But in any event, we've been collecting tariffs for hundreds of years. I mean, we collect tariffs now. Why do we need another bureaucracy to collect tariffs? So how efficient is that? That's one example. Here's another that's worrying, really very worrying. So we say he wants to be known as the peace president, but he's angering our allies, which you don't usually just go attack allies. You find a way, you have disagreements with them. But then you say to the Panamanians, we want to take back the Panama Canal, and they don't want to give it back. So what does take back mean? Does that mean we send in the troops? I mean, what does that mean?
Well, Jack, that's one I've been wondering about. This was I wasn't in journalism yet, but Jimmy Carter did this. This was a treaty. This wasn't something that just happened. So is he going to abrogate the treaty? He's making some claims. He says that the Panamanians are charging us too much. He said that they let the canal run into disrepair. They aren't taking care of it. He says that the Chinese are really running the ports there. So he's made these assertions. I don't actually know independently if they're true. The stuff that he talks about that I know about, like that you can just turn a faucet in California and a valve in Southern California have as much water as he wants. I know these aren't true, but even if, but sometimes he, to me, acts less like a president, more like a real estate negotiator. He's trying to open a discussion with the Panamanians. Maybe he doesn't really want the United States flag to fly over it again. Maybe he wants something else. And he sort of jumpstarts these conversations. And I'm part of me as the journalist, I want the stuff to be factual. The other part of me thinks, okay, I have to maybe take a step back and see what he's really doing here.
Yeah, what so happens by curiously, I know quite a lot about the Panama Canal.
All right.
Some years ago, I did a story where I tried to swim the Panama Canal, the whole canal from deep water to deep water. Only one person's ever done it, and that's Richard Halliburton. He did it in the 1920s. Went from the Gulf of America, as Trump would like us to call it, to the Pacific. And so and they wouldn't let me do it because now, of course, everything in the canal is regulated, and all they want is to have films of Love Boat going through. When I told them I wanted to swim it, they actually took me down and showed me a film of Richard Halliburton doing it. But I got in the water, by the way. I swam part of it. But anyway, I learned a lot about the canal. It's actually run pretty well. It's run well. It's an important business for the Panamanians. And other claims that Trump is making about the canal are just not true. What is true is that Chinese have put up port facilities at both ends. I guess that's something, but we could put up our own port facilities, but they're not overcharging us or charging us more than anybody else. So maybe that is a negotiating tactic, but it's not a good negotiating tactic. And you can't say you're a peace president and then making these truculent comments about takeover. And I think I see something bigger here, Carl. And I'm not one, as you know, I try to be pretty much down the middle of the road when I write, even if I'm writing an opinion column. But I see something happening here that is worrying, and that is, on the one hand, a lot of bluster, a lot of measures being taken very quickly, getting rid of all DEI workers, as something was announced this morning. Maybe some people think that's a good idea. I'm not arguing one way or the other, but there's this whole long list of things that are happening very quickly, some of which are unconstitutional, like telling people who are born in the United States they can't be American citizens if their parents can't.
I'd like to revisit that. We'll come back to that in a minute.
Yeah,
keep making your point.
But anyway, but the problem here is that he's going to be having fights on all fronts. And that's not a good idea. In fact, it's very hard to get things done when you're fighting everybody all the time. It's not very strategic. And furthermore, and this is a major point I tried to make in the article, there's a fundamental flaw in his thinking and in the thinking of Republicans who are going along with all of this, and that is that he has a mandate. He actually doesn't have a great mandate. He has a very small mandate. And he didn't even win the popular vote by a majority. He won a plurality. And Biden's failure as president was in part tied to the fact that he acted as if he had a big mandate, and he didn't. And so he overreached. And Trump
as you point out in your column, Jack, he had a bigger mandate than Trump. If you're just going to go by the vote totals.
Yeah.
Look, I agree with this. Let me do a quick ID break here. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. You're listening to RCP on Sirius XM Radio, POTUS channel 124, or maybe watching it on our podcast. I'm talking with John Maxwell Hamilton, professor of journalism at Louisiana State University and a columnist for Real Clear Politics. Jack, I wanted to ask you about something though. This birthright citizenship thing. Again, he signs an order or whatever, executive order. Well, it's not something that can be done with executive order. It may not be done except with a constitutional amendment. For nearly 100 years, there's language in the 14th Amendment that suggests that pretty strongly that people born here are American citizens, and never seriously been challenged. There was a Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court affirmed that. That's been basically the policy for 200 years. There have been people who've raised questions about slight ambiguous nature of the language. They've never gotten anywhere. So obviously this can't be done with a presidential pen. But it seems to me that what Trump do, and again, I don't mean to be giving him too much credit, but I also don't want to give him too little credit. He seems to be everything's on the table. What we need, it seems to me, and Trump is not this articulate, but a national conversation about immigration. What should be our refugee status? This refugee law was basically misused during the Biden administration. That's what he wants to say. I think most people agree with that. We take between 1 million and 1.5 million legal immigrants every year. What should be their criterion? Is that the right number? Should it be less? Should it be more? These are we don't really have a conversation. The two parties just call each other's names. And it seems to me when Trump makes these grandiose gestures or statements, what he's doing is setting up the environment where we can have a conversation, a national conversation about immigration, and see where we want to be as a country. Am I being too charitable?
Well, because I don't think in the bombastic way Trump does. I have trouble maybe putting myself in his place, and maybe he has a brilliant strategy. I appreciate what you're saying, but I guess I just don't agree. I don't think it's good to lay out markers that only divide people. And I think that's what this does. In fact, in the area of immigration, I would say there is a mandate, a huge national mandate to fix immigration. The Republicans and Democrats want to do it, and the public wants it done. And they're right. And so I think there's a case where Trump could actually, in another way, really go down the road of getting this done, and done fairly quickly, probably. No legislation happens overnight, but it could be done. And that's something that he could really hang his hat on. And I might say, if Biden had done a better job, even though the Republicans, didn't want to give him a win, if Biden had done a better job on the border, we would have a Democrat in the White House today.
I think I happen to agree with that. Yeah. All right. Here's another thing I want to ask you about the rhetoric of Donald Trump, President Trump's inaugural address, and he gave 2 other speeches that day. Now he's done 2 press conferences. He's been speaking. If you add it all together, like 4 or 5 hours in the first 48 hours he was president. I thought initially, and I said this on this show, that the inaugural address disappointed me by how combative it was. It was in many ways a combination of a campaign speech and a State of the Union speech. It wasn't a traditional inaugural address, and he didn't give one the first time. There was no real. He said, "I want to be a unifier," but he didn't really. Okay, one line in the speech of a lot of non-unifying other sentences. But when I see this blizzard of executive orders, I'm thinking, well, maybe it would have been hypocritical for him to, be, holding hands and singing Kumbaya. that this is a president who sees himself as a disruptive person, a change agent. He thinks he has a mandate, and a lot of, when he says on inauguration day, to a crowd, Joe Biden was the worst president we ever had. It's not how presidents talk in the past, but it's how Trump's governing. So maybe it's a unifying. It's at least unifying in terms of, the message goes with the rhetoric, the policy goes with the rhetoric. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's consistent with itself.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, but that doesn't change the fact. I guess you could give him credit for doing what he said he would do. But although I still maintain that what he said he would do has contradictions, vagueness, and just platitudinous nonsense. But I would argue that yes, it is important to make bold statements and to do things boldly. But if you do it the way he's doing it, he's going to accomplish a lot less than he would otherwise. And he's going to put the country through a lot. He's going to get people upset over things they shouldn't be upset about. Why worry about whether you're born in the United States, you're a citizen or not? Why not deal with the real clear border issues? Don't pick every fight. Pick a few and win. And I thought about this today as I was looking at what happened yesterday after I wrote the column. I'm developing the 3 tsunami thesis. Trump creates a tsunami. Then there's a tsunami against him that's going to include some of his former supporters. And then we're going to see what the third one is. And I'm worried about that. I think it's very important for people who object to some of the things Trump wants to do, that they remain calm. They use the institutions we've got to push back in a reasonable way and not start saying crazy, stupid things, not start saying defunding the police and other dumb things, and just be calm and carry on, as the British like to say. Because I'm worried that if we're not careful, then we're going to have even a bigger pushback by Trump, and that's going to get us into a terrible situation. And I'm worried about that because I think Trump doesn't respect institutions, And I think he fancies that he has this big mandate, and who knows what kind of ideas he would come up with. I mean, I'm not predicting exactly what would happen, but I'm worried. I'm frightened. Yeah.
Well, we'll be watching. That's going to do it for us today. You've been listening to John Maxwell Hamilton, professor at LSU. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief. And listen to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM Radio. Join us again tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. in the West, 6 p.m. here in the East. Have a good evening.